So good morning. Today we will be completing the chapter 24, that's the sheep and goats, and the chapter 28 that will be about the dogs and cats. So in sheep and goats, we will talk about the general requirements that are required by the sheep and goats, the nutrient required by the sheep and goat, and we will also go through the specific requirements and feeding of sheep and goat. So let's start with the sheep. So just a brief introduction about the sheep and goats. They have been contributing greatly to food and fiber production worldwide for centuries, and they continue to do so. So So in this chapter, we will examine the nutritional requirements and the feed resources that are appropriate to meet these requirements for the various physiological states and functions. So the sheep and goat, they are raised to produce meat, milk, or fiber like wool, mohair, and cashmere. So management of sheep and goat emphasizes the management of the amount and quality of forage resources. So that means these resources are influenced by the climate, seasonal weather patterns, and intake can be increased by ensuring that animals have access to large amounts of forage of high digestibility. So we all know that in any pasture system, internal parasite control is required because infestation leads to dramatically reduce the productivity and ultimately the profit. So general nutrients that are required by the sheep and goat, let's start with the sheep. So different nutrient requirements have been summarized for sheep by the National Research Council. So these are the different organizations like Agriculture Research Council, the National Research Council, the Sheep Council of Australia. These publications, they serve actually as the guidelines for formulating the diets to meet the nutrient requirements of the sheep and goats. So the general requirement of sheep and goat will be discussed. So let's start with the sheep. So the different nutrients that are required by all sheep and goats are the energy, proteins, minerals, vitamins, water. So starting with the energy, so generally the most limiting nutrient in Eve and doe nutrition is energy. So you all know that Eve we call like female sheep, and doe is the bisexual sheep or goat, any kind of animal that's bisexual. So the major resources of energy are from the pasture, that's the forage, range, and browse. We have hay, silage, byproduct feeds, and grains. So energy deficiencies always result in reduced growth or weight loss, and also the reduced reproductive efficiency, reduced milk or fiber production, and increased death loss. Nutrients required in the greatest quantity is usually the most limiting nutrient. The energy comes primarily from carbohydrates. We all know that the energy comes from carbohydrates and fats in the diet, but also from excess protein. So excess energy is stored as fat in the body. The energy is expressed in different ways. We have the TDN, that's the total digestible nutrients, which is calculated in percentage. We have the digestible energy that's calculated in kilocalories, and we have metabolizable energy, which is calculated in kilocalories too. The net energy is also calculated in kilocalories. Also, we have the digestible organic matter that we can calculate in percent. So we all know that good quality pasture, hay, silage, or byproducts can usually meet the energy requirements most economically. So meeting the high energy demands of rapid growth or rapid fetal development or lactation may also require the supplementation with grain. So in most cases, the pasture, hay, silage, or byproduct feeds should be the major feedstuffs that are used to meet these energy requirements. So improper feeding of energy to livestock, that means not enough energy in the diet. It might result in the reduced fertility, reduced growth rates, reduced milk production, loss of body conditions, less cold tolerance, reduced nutrient absorption, or if there is too much energy in diet, that may result in wasteful economically. The fat females are more prone to pregnancy, toxemia, and dystocia. The feed efficiency decreases once an animal has reached its optimal finish, or excess finish is undesirable to most of the consumers. So those are the effects caused due to too much energy in the diet. Moving to the proteins, as ruminants, the sheep and goats rely on the microbial population in their rumens to manufacture many of the amino acids and vitamins that are required for desired production. So therefore, we may say that the quantity of protein in the diet is more important than the quality of the protein. Although the proteins, they are required in smaller amounts than energy, but they are more expensive feed ingredient than energy. So amount more important than quality. Also, the excess protein is not stored in the body. So excess protein is broken down and it's used as energy. Some excess protein may be beneficial if parasite burdens or barber polworm are excessive. The protein is expressed in different ways, like we have the crude protein, we have digestible protein, we have metabolizable protein, we have the DIP, that's the rumen degraded intake protein. Also, we have the UIP, that's the undegraded intake protein. So these are the different kinds of protein. That means the protein which is expressed in different ways. So crude protein, that can be calculated by, we already talked about that, that's the total nitrogen times 6.26, that's the factor, we have to times it by that. So whatever nitrogen percentage we get, we just have to times it by 6.26 and we get the crude protein. So true or natural protein means it includes the rumen degraded intake protein, that's the DIP. So digested in rumen, the nitrogen is converted to ammonia by the and then to the microbial protein. We have the undegradable intake protein, that's the UIP, or we can say bypass or escape protein. That's not digested in rumen. That is digested in small intestines, or we can say the post-ruminally, or excreted in the feces. We have one more, that's the non-protein nitrogen. For example, we have urea. The bypass protein is a mix of microbial protein and bypass dietary protein, is desired for optimal productivity. In high producing animals, it's recommended that 25 to 30% of protein be bypass protein. 20 to 30% of the protein in fresh, high quality forage is the bypass protein. So supplementing with bypass protein may improve productivity or increase resistance to certain internal parasites. So what are the different sources of this bypass protein? Or if we will look for the low protein source, it will be in soybean meal, cottonseed meal, peanut meals, linseed meal. So the medium sources are the cottonseed meal, dehydrated alfalfa, or you can say the distillers grains, and high protein you will see in the corn, that's the gluten meal or the fish meal. So if there is improper feeding of protein to livestock, that means not enough proteins. If there is protein deficiency. So protein deficiency is rare. Most effects are subclinical. For example, there will be some effects on reproduction. There will be reduced growth rates, reduced hoof and horn growth. Milk production will be reduced, the fiber production, reduced resistance to diseases or especially the parasites. reduced rumen functions, or if there will not be enough protein in the diet, it might cause the reduced nutrition absorption. And when there is too much protein in the diet, the effects are different. That means it will be expensive and inefficient source of energy. So risk of vessel not rot in males is caused. It can also cause the metabolic harm. The excess nitrogen is converted to ammonia and then urea, and which reduces the performance as energy is required for removal. So excess protein has been shown to cause the reproductive problems in cattle, or excess nitrogen in the manure can be environmental concern. So regarding the mineral requirements are affected by several factors, including the breed, age, sex, growth rate, physiological state, level and chemical form of ingested minerals, and interaction with other minerals in the diet. So the mineral requirements and toxicities are fairly well established for sheep, but they have not been definitely established. So the different macro mineral requirements of sheep and goat are for like, so it's actually divided into two kinds of minerals. That's the macro minerals and micro minerals. So macro minerals, when we talk about macro minerals, that includes the calcium, phosphorus, sodium, potassium, magnesium, sulfur, chloride. The micro mineral requirements for sheep and goat include the iodine, copper, cobalt, iron, manganese. We have molybdenum, selenium, zinc. So these are all the micronutrients, or we can say the micro minerals. Salt, we all know the most common form of sodium and chlorine is inexpensive and highly palatable, and is usually provided free of choice to sheep and goat. So providing it in loose form is preferred rather than the blocks, which sheep and goats tend to bite the block. So rather than licking the block, they just tend to they just break that, or they just cut that block. So that's the sodium and chlorine. So sodium chloride is the most inexpensive and most common form of sodium and chloride. Potassium, which is generally high in most forages and is most seldom deficient in the diet. Supplementation may be needed when animals are on high grain diets, uh, or grazing mature or drought-stressed pastures. So talking about the calcium and phosphorus, they are closely related and important. We all know that in the normal development of teeth and bone. So deficiency in either some calcium or phosphorus ratio of less than 1.2 is to 1 may cause reduced growth and other possible metabolic problems. So talking about the sulfur, which is an important mineral because it functions in the synthesis of methionine and cysteine. That's the sulfur containing amino acids. We all know that these methionine and cysteine, which are the sulfur containing amino acids, they are important for live weight growth, but also for wool and hair growth. So moving to the magnesium deficiency is most commonly associated with sheep and goats grazing the lush, fast-growing pastures in the spring. So when the grass is high in nitrogen and potash and low in magnesium, so this is the kind of magnesium deficiency that occurs in most of the sheep and goats. If the grass is high in nitrogen and potassium, but it's low in magnesium. So if blood levels of the magnesium are low, the animal may suffer from grass tetany. Or the animal may fall to the ground, froth at the mouth, and rigidly extend and relax the legs. So untreated animals can die. So how that can be prevented is that prevention by feeding adequate levels of magnesium is the best, but animals can be treated by some intravenous administration of calcium and magnesium in the gluconate form. So trace elements or microminerals, talking about that, there is also a relationship between the copper and molybdenum in sheep or goats. If a feed has a normal or low level of copper with a high level of molybdenum, then copper deficiency may occur. So adding molybdenum to the diet of sheep can be effective in reducing the toxicity of copper. Talking about the selenium, the micromineral that's regulated by the Food and Drug Administration because of its potential toxicity. So deficiency in selenium, it results in white muscle disease. So in sheep or goats can also reduce the reproductive efficiency of sheep and goats. Iron, which is a major component of hemoglobin, is generally adequate in most feeds, and deficiency symptoms are rare in healthy animals. However, blood loss might be caused by internal parasites that can cause anemia. So iodine, which is generally adequate in most feeds, except when grown in some areas of the northeastern or Great Lakes or Rocky Mountain regions of United States. So deficiency of iodine is generally exhibited in newborns by an enlarged thyroid gland, clearly visible on the neck. That's called the goiter. Zinc, which is not widely stored in the body, so diet should have a continuous supply of this. Deficiencies are very rare that can result in reduced fertility. So moving to the manganese, so manganese is required by both sheep and goats, but precise levels have not been established. So most forages have greater than 50 parts per million manganese, and most grains have 15 to 20 parts per million manganese. So the deficiencies of the manganese are also very rare. However, the deficiency signs include difficulty in walking, skeletal abnormalities, or there might be some reduced reproductive efficiency. So talking about the cobalt, which is a micromineral, it's needed by the microbes that are present in the rumen to synthesize the vitamin B12, but is usually adequate in most of the feedstuffs. So these are the different possible micronutrient problems we already talked about, that how they affect and what are the different deficiency symptoms caused due to the deficiency of these micronutrients and macronutrients. So moving to the vitamins, the vitamins are the fat soluble A, vitamin D, vitamin E, and vitamin K. So carotene, that's the green forages, is a source of vitamin A. The sunlight is the source of vitamin D. The vitamin E sometimes requires the supplementation. Vitamin K can be synthesized in rumen. So water-soluble B complex or C, that's the B vitamins, they are synthesized in the rumen, and vitamin C is synthesized in the tissues. So the last, that's the nutrients required by the sheep and goat, is the water. In addition to drinking water, the sheep and goats obtain water from their feed or from the snow and dew. The total water required varies by the size and physiological state of the animal, the environmental temperature, and the animal's level of intake. So there is a table 24.1 that's in the book. So it presents a range in water intake requirements for sheep and goats in various physiological states and at different temperatures. So water intake is expressed as kilogram of water needed per kg of dry matter intake. So Eve weight change means, like I said, the Eve is the female sheep. So normally expected weight change of this graph actually represents the expected weight change of a 70 kg Eve, which has twins during 1 year production schedule. So weight change for the same Eve carrying a single lamb would be approximately 2/3 the above changes. So it will be different who will be carrying just a single rather than the twin. So this graph actually illustrates the weight change at different stages like lambing, weaning, breeding. So how the weight change takes place in the ewe. So a successful sheep production system must effectively manage and provide the needed requirements to ewes at breeding, through gestation, and during lactation, to rams and to lambs. So ewes are the backbone of any sheep production enterprise. So they must remain fertile and produce lamb, wool, and milk. So in a one-time per year lambing system, the ewe will be exposed to the ram once per year and the ewe will lamb once a year. So at lambing, the weight loss is dramatic and nutrient demand is very high because of the onset of lactation. So during lactation, there will be a gradual decrease in body weight is expected because the nutrient demand for milk is higher than the nutrient intake. So at weaning, the demand and use of milk is reduced, resulting in reduction in nutrient requirements and the drying of the mammary glands. So after weaning, the ewe replenishes body reserves and gains weight before rebreeding. So such dramatic weight changes are normal. So after weaning, it actually replenishes this body reserves and gains weight before the rebreeding. So these weight changes are actually normal, but ewes need to be properly fed. So we have to feed them properly to avoid the metabolic disorders and improve the likelihood of producing healthy, fast-growing lambs. So feeding the ewe, there are different practices like flushing. The flushing is the practice of improving the nutrient intake and body condition prior to or during the breeding. So its purpose is actually to increase the rate of ovulation and hence lambing rate. The response to flushing is influenced by the age of the ewe. That means the mature ewes show a greater response than the yearlings. So gestation, which is the other practice, that's the gestation length of a ewe is approximately 5 months. That's about 147 to 150 days. So feeding ewe lambs during the early part of gestation is relatively the same as feeding them before breeding season. So most important time for feeding these ewe lambs will occur during the last third of the gestation period. So at this time, the lamb or lambs gain most of their weight prior to the birth. Like I said, the length of this gestation length is approximately 5 months. That means 147 to 150 days. Milk production from the ewe is directly related to the genetic potential, nutrition, and the number of the lambs that are suckling. So genetic potential for milk production varies between and within the breeds. Some breeds have been selected for milk production for human use or for use in making cheese. So an ewe suckling twins produces like 25 to 50% more milk than if she were suckling single. So moving to the suckling lambs, that's the most critical need for the newborn lamb is to receive colostrum. So the colostrum is actually the ewe's first milk. That's called the colostrum. Colostrum is high in protein, fat, minerals, vitamins, and immunoglobulins. That's these immunoglobulins are important for disease resistance. Lambs should consume at least 50 to 100 ml of this colostrum. So fresh colostrum can be provided from another ewe, or colostrum from ewes can be frozen for later thawing and then bottled or then stomach tube feeding can be done. We all know that the lambs, they rely solely on the milk from their mothers for nutrients for like 3 to 4 weeks. So they begin to nibble at high quality feeds at 3 to 4 weeks of age. We can use the milk replacers. The feeding orphaned or excess lambs can be accomplished with the milk replacers. So the decision to remove the lamb from the ewe should be made early 24, 40 8 hours after the birth, and the lamb should be placed in an area away from the sounds and smell of the ewe. So we have many commercial milk replacers that are available that contain 25 to 30% fat, 20 to 25% milk protein, and 30 to 35% of milk sugar, that's the lactose. Creep feeding is another method of feeding that's to supplement the ewe's milk and shift the diet of lambs to dry feed. A creep feeder is often set up. So what a creep feeder is, it's actually an area where lambs have access to feed without competition from the eaves. So creep feeders are usually set up for lambs about 2 weeks of age, and expected consumption should average like 200 to 250 grams per day from age 20 days through the weaning. So these creep rotations have to be palatable. They should contain at least 15% crude protein and antibiotics. So moving to the growing lambs, the lambs can be grown and finished on high quality pasture or on pasture plus the supplementation or in dry lot feeding system. They can be grown and finished on high quality pasture, on pasture plus supplementation, or in dry lot feeding systems, because it also depends on the type of system that's used, will depend on the desired marketing time that can be made in a dry lot, or the type of lamb that has to be sold. So sometimes the pastures of cool season animals, like we have the oats, wheat, barley or rye grass, or the legumes that has alfalfa or clover, or cool season perennials which are mixed with a legume, can provide the nutrients for excellent growth. So if lambs are used to graze lower quality pastures or to clean up unwanted vegetation, then additional energy supplementation may be required. So whole or ground grains can be used for that, for supplementation. So the specific requirements of feeding of goats. So that was all about the sheep. So the specific requirements and feeding of goats, there are about 400 million goats in the world that produce the milk, meat, fiber, that's the cashmere and mohair, and the skins. So unfortunately, much less is known about these goats than about sheep or cattle. So much of the nutrition information is derived from sheep and cattle. So feeding behavior of goats is much different from that of other ruminants. They have more mobile prehensile lips and an agile tongue that allows them to select specific plants and specific plant parts. So goats utilize bipedal stance to obtain the desired feed, and even climb into shrubs and trees to obtain feed. So three types of goats have been developed to meet the market needs. These are the meat goat, the Angora goat, that results in the production of mohair, and we have the dairy goats. Meat goats include a variety of breeds. So in United States, the meat goats are quite often called the Spanish goats. But still they originate from several different breeds. The most famous meat goat is the Boer goat of Africa. So recently the Boer goat embryos have been brought to United States via New Zealand, and they make a large impact on genetic quality of meat goat production. So National Research Council in 1981, they developed nutritional requirements for goats that are mostly set up in a different format as compared to other NRC guidelines. For reference, you can see a table 24.8 on book. So that will give you some idea about those nutritional requirements for goats. And it's set up in a different format. So since most goats are traditionally raised on pasture or range, they receive little routine supplementation or creep diet. So protein is usually the limiting nutrient of range goats, and supplementation of about 300 to 400 grams of soya bean meal or cottonseed meal improves the production. So moving to the fiber producing these dairy goats, dairy goats have been extensively selected for milk production. The general requirements for maintenance and growth are the same as for meat goats. To meet the requirements, the goats should be fed as much as high quality forage as they want and then supplemented with a limited amount of grain. The forage can be grazed or in the form of hay. To meet the nutrient demands, it requires that a higher quality diet be fed. Usually this is done with grain concentrate feeding, or the concentrate feeding is continued during the lactation period. The proper nutrition and feeding of dairy requires the watchful eye of the owner and individual feeding to meet the production. So the general guidelines for feeding goats, there are many commercially available grain mixes that are formulated for the goats. The dairy cattle grain mixes can be substituted if goat mixes are not available or if demand for goat mixes is low and freshness of feed is a problem. Also, the consumption of colostrums during the first few hours of life is extremely important to ensure the survival. The frozen colostrums can be thawed and used, like we already discussed. The goat colostrum is preferred to cow colostrums, but cow colostrums can be used. So these are the the general guidelines for feeding the goats. Sometimes the growing replacement animals is similar to sheep in that it's desirable to have fat replacement animals. So most nutrients should be obtained from forages, but limited supplementation may be required to reach the desired target weight. So these are the different guidelines for feeding the goats. So there are certain nutritional and metabolic diseases that affect the sheep and goats. So how that can be avoiding these nutritional and metabolic diseases like urinary calculi, the enterotoxemia type D, and white muscle disease or ketosis. Urinary calculi, which is a problem, it's also called water belly. That's a problem associated with males and wethers. So mineral stones develop in the bladder and may become lodged in the urethra, causing the blockage of urination or possible bladder rupture and death. So different symptoms present in this urinary calculi disease is that there's difficulty in urination, staining, and sometimes the kicking at the belly. Another disease is the enterotoxemia type D, or we can name it as the overeating disease, which is one of the most common nutritional problems occurring with animals on high quality, usually the diets. It's caused by Clostridium perfringens type D and results in rapid death in many animals. So symptoms associated with this disease, the depression, abdominal pain, or grinding teeth. So there is an inexpensive vaccination program for this disease. White muscle disease, which is also called the stiff limb disease, is a nutritional muscular dystrophy that's caused by deficiency of selenium, vitamin E, or both the selenium and vitamin E. So it's usually seen in animals 6 to 8 weeks old. It results in poor growth, difficulty in movement, stiff legs, and possible death. So the prevention can be accomplished by providing selenium and vitamin E in diet through injection. And the last disease that mostly affects these sheep and goat or the ketosis, which is also called the pregnancy toxemia or lambing paralysis. It's a nutritional disorder that occurs at the very end of gestation and is mostly associated with high demand by the fetus for carbohydrates, for example, glucose or glucose precursors. So that was all about the different kinds of these nutritional and metabolic diseases. So let's move to the other chapter. That's the cats, dogs and cats, chapter 28. So, a brief introduction about the dogs and cats is that we all know that the dogs and cats, they are the most popular pets in the United States, with 36% of US households having one or more uh, dogs and 34% having at least one cat. So 50% have both dog and cats. So they were domesticated and have been companions of humans for over 10,000 years and were even interred with humans about 12,500 years ago. So dog number is about 60 million and cats are about 75 million, and most of these pets are fed the manufactured foods like categorized as dry, canned, semi-moist, or we can say snacks or treats. So what are the differences between certain dogs and cats is that all the dogs and cats, they belong to the order Carnivora. There are important differences between them in dietary habits, or we can say the digestive tract morphology and nutritional requirements. Cats are almost totally carnivores in the wild, whereas dogs tend to be more omnivores. So both can use plant products in manufactured diets, but the metabolism of cats is more attuned to nutrients that are provided by the animal prey. The dogs also have more premolars and molars, with those in the rare design for crushing, which is helpful in utilizing the plant material. The upper P4 premolar, or we can say the carnassial of the cat, when occluding with the lower molar, serve as the shear to cut the animal flesh, and the cat doesn't have the crushing molars. Cats have dietary requirements for certain nutrients that are found in animal tissues and rarely in the plants. These include the essential fatty acids. We have arachidonic acid, performed vitamin A, and aminosulfonic acid or taurine. While as dogs, on the other hand, they can generally synthesize sufficient arachidonic acids from the linoleic acid or vitamin A. They can synthesize from the beta carotene, and taurine they can synthesize from sulfur containing amino acids. Nutrient precursors that are found in plants. Also, they can synthesize the sulfur containing amino acids. So, the nutrition and feeding of dogs. Ancestral dogs and their canid relatives are generally considered as the pack hunters, allowing them to kill prey as large or larger than themselves. So, domestic dogs fed dry diets and let them eat about 10 to 13 meals per day, consuming most of these meals during daytime. When they are not fed ad libitum, the weaned puppies are commonly fed 2 to 3 times per day until 6 months of age and 2 times per day until 1 year. And for those that are pregnant or lactating or working, the feeding ad libitum 2 or more times a day may be desirable. Water, which is the most important nutrient for the dog, as it's for all living creatures. So, dogs contain water in liquid form from food or from oxidation of hydrogen during metabolism. That's called the metabolic water. So, even if a dog loses all of his body fat and half of his protein, he can survive. But water is so important that he could die if he loses only 10% of water in his body. So, water makes up more than half of an adult dog's body weight. Although the canned dog food may have a lot of water in it, it's not enough for your dog. Make sure that your dog always has some fresh, clean water available. So during lactation, hot weather, or severe exertion, the water consumption may be 4 or more times the dry matter intake. Also, the growing puppies and the adult dogs, they consume 2 to 3 times more water than they consume the dry matter. So the energy, which is also an important nutrient for dogs and cats, the energy needs of dogs are commonly expressed in units of metabolizable energy, and small dogs have higher metabolizable energy requirements per unit of body weight than the large dogs. Working or lactating adult dogs, they may require 2 or 3 times more food than is required for maintenance. That's an obvious thing. And also, the dogs of different breeds, temperament, body condition, or subjected to extremes of environment, exercise, or stress, they may vary from average, and adjustments have to be made to accommodate the individual needs. So proteins and amino acids, another important nutrient, is required to provide essential. The dietary protein is required to provide the essential amino acids that can be synthesized rapidly enough by the dog's own tissues, plus additional nitrogen for tissue synthesis of non-essential amino acids if performed supplies are not adequate. So dietary requirements for protein, they depend upon the protein quality, that's the essential amino acid content, the protein digestibility, energy intake per day, prior nutritional status, feeding pattern, age, growth, etc. National Research Council in 2004 proposed the recommended protein and essential amino acid allowances in the dry matter of dog with 4 kilocalories metabolizable energy per gram dry matter, and that's shown in the table 28.4 in your book. So there are different kinds of nutrients, the protein percentage, and the growth, late gestation, or at the onset of lactation or adult maintenance, the percentage of different proteins or different nutrients. So carbohydrates, dogs like other animals have a metabolic requirement for glucose. Nearly all commercial dog foods contain starch, which when hydrolyzed during digestion will provide an glucose supply. So however, if fed a meat-based diet without added carbohydrate, the dog must meet its needs from gluconeogenesis in the liver and kidneys using the precursors such as amino acids from protein or glycerol from fat to synthesize the glucose. The carbohydrates actually come from plants when your dog eats the grains and vegetables they get, for example, the sugars, starch, fiber. Carbohydrates also power the tissues in your dog's body, so they also keep your dog's intestines healthy. So dogs, like other animals, they have a metabolic requirement for glucose. So nearly all commercial dog food, they contain starch, which when hydrolyzed will provide you the ample glucose supply. So minerals, actually the recommended allowances for minerals in dry matter of dog food with 4 kilocalories metabolizable energy per gram dry matter, they are shown in the table 28.5 in your book. So at the different stage like growth stage, the late gestational lactation, or the adult maintenance. So young dogs fed 0.55% of calcium, they ate more food and gained more height and weight than the dogs who were fed just 1.1% calcium, but had the bowed front legs, pain when they walked, and developed osteoporosis and fractures. So young dogs fed 3.3% of calcium, they grew slower than those fed with lower concentration of calcium and developed curvatures of the radius associated with osteochondrosis. They also exhibited certain paralysis of hind limbs with neurologic signs of canine wobbler syndrome. So this is the dog with the canine wobbler syndrome. What canine wobbler syndrome is that it's a disease of the neck, the cervical spine, that's seen in large and giant breeds of dogs. So these dogs actually experience the compression of the spinal cord and the spinal nerve roots that result in the nervous system deficit or the neck pain. So that's the dog with this canine wobbler syndrome. Moving to the vitamins, the recommended allowances for vitamins in dry matter of dog foods with 4 kilocalories metabolizable energy per gram of dry matter, they are already shown in the table in your book, 28.6 table number. So no requirement has been actually given for biotin, although dogs are known to have a metabolic requirement for this vitamin. You can see that in the table 28.6, there is no requirement for the biotin, although there has been a requirement for this vitamin. So microbial synthesis within the dog's digestive system or digestive tract may supplement the low biotin, or we can say the vitamin K levels in natural dietary ingredients. However, to provide the further assurance of adequacy, most high-quality dog foods include biotin in the vitamin premix. So let's talk about the commercial dog foods. Many ingredients of both animal and plant origin are used in the dog foods. Their suitability actually depends on the nutrient and energy content, the digestibility, palatability, and freedom from toxins. An ingredient list on a dog food label must conform to AFCO definitions. An example formula for dry dog food is shown in table 28.7. So different feeding guidelines for this is for the dogs, it's just dogs should be fed twice a day, depending on the breed, age, size, and energy level, all factor into how often dogs should eat and how much. The fresh dog often is an increasing popular alternative to dry kibble or wet canned food. Since the puppies, they grow rapidly, they need more food than the adult dogs. So puppy nutrition is crucial for developing a foundation for future growth as well as their bone and organ development. The puppies must have a specific amount of calcium in their diet, otherwise they can develop certain metabolic bone diseases or orthopedic conditions like early onset of arthritis or toy breed puppies in particular, they are prone to hypoglycemia. Because of the differences in nutrient and energy density between commercial food dogs, it's not possible to provide a universally applicable list of weights or volumes. That means how many cups should be fed. However, companies, they have tested their products and provide useful feeding recommendations for the dog foods that they sell. So that was all about the nutrition and feeding of the dogs. So let's move to the nutrition and feeding of cats. So most wild felids, except for the lion, are solitary hunters. So domestic cats, they eat about 12 to 20 meals every 24 hours. The cats are more sensitive to taste and texture and will only eat what they can smell. The proportion of canned food purchased in the United States for cats is slightly more than twice the proportion of canned food that's purchased for the dogs. So this difference actually represents a decision made for kittens by their owners, and once established performance for canned food tends to persist in the adulthood. Three main factors that determine the nutritional need of cats is the stage of life, how active is the cat, or is the cat maintaining an ideal body condition. So kittens are actually the cats that are less than 1 year of age. So young adult is 1 to 7 years of age. Mature adults are 7 to 11 years, and seniors are over 11 years. So the different nutrients that are necessary for the cats are like, let's start with water, because cats are designed to fulfill most of their water requirements by eating fresh raw food. They naturally have a low thirst drive. So this can lead to health issues when they eat dry fruit products and treats. One of the problems is that even though they become dehydrated, eating the kibble, their natural programming may not encourage them to drink more, and their urine can become too concentrated. Even though a healthy cat doesn't drink much water, you should always have clean drinking water available, and please make sure that it's a good quality, which means that just turning on the faucet may be out, especially if your community puts fluoride in the water supply. So if you have a well, get it tested annually for the contaminants. Since we all know that there are different kinds of the contaminants that are present in the water, so feeding your dog, giving that water to your dog or cat, that might result in certain kind of diseases or infections in your pets. So that's why it's recommended that if you have a well, just test that water, get it tested annually for certain contaminants. So energy needs of cats are commonly expressed in units of metabolizable energy, although metabolizable energy concentrations have been determined for few cat food ingredients. So daily metabolizable energy intakes observed for cats are shown in table. Proteins and amino acids, as is true for the dog, the protein is required in diet of the cat to provide essential amino acids as well as additional nitrogen for tissue synthesis of non-essential amino acids if performed quantities are insufficient. Cats require the same dietary essential amino acids as the dog, plus the taurine. Taurine cannot be synthesized by the cat at a sufficient rate from methionine or cysteine to meet the tissue needs, and there is an obligatory loss of taurine in the bile as a bile salt conjugates. So it has been found that deficiency of taurine results in central retinal degeneration, or it can result in impaired vision or reproductive failure or cardiac abnormalities. Sometimes there is some impaired function of the immune system also. So cats need animal sources of this nutrient, as the amino acids from vegetable sources are not well utilized. So how much each animal may need can vary slightly due to a variety of factors like physiological state, age, activity, and digestibility of the protein source that's being fed to the cat or dog. So cats have a very high requirement for protein. So like we already said that the deficiency of taurine in the cats results in a variety in various diseases, or we can say the impaired vision, the reproductive failure, the cardiac abnormalities. So taurine disaster, for example, is an amino acid that pet food manufacturers didn't consider essential until cats began to suffer and die from eating these processed products that are deficient in the taurine. Another important nutrient is the fats and fatty acids. So fat, which is a good source, energy source, favors the absorption of fat-soluble vitamins and usually enhances the palatability of cat food. So dry and semi-moist cat foods contain 8 to 13% fat, whereas the cat food contain about 10 to 40% of fat on dry matter basis. Fats and oils are composed of fatty acids. Sometimes they are referred to as vitamin F. The following are the fatty acids most involved in the feline health. That's the omega-3 fatty acid, which include the alpha-linolic acid, the eicosapentaenoic acid, and docosahexaenoic acid, and omega-6 fatty acid, including linolic acid, gamma-linolic acid, arachidonic acid, and conjugated linolic acids. So, linolic and arachidonic acids have long been considered as essential fatty acids for the cats. One more thing I want to mention here is that more recently, the DHA, that is the has been added due to its important contribution to feline vision, the reproductive health, and the immune system. Another nutrient is the carbohydrate. Cats do not have a dietary carbohydrate requirement but are able to meet tissue glucose needs by gluconeogenesis. So, however, there are certain dry commercial cat foods that contain 40% or more carbohydrate, and digestion of starch and sugars in these products generally exceed 80% and may sometimes exceed 90%. Minerals, the recommended allowances for the minerals in cat food dry matter with 4 kilocalories, metabolizable energy grams per dry matter. They are shown in the table in your book depending upon the growth, the late gestation or lactation, or the adult maintenance. So these minerals are actually involved in tissue structure, the acid-base balance, or osmotic regulation, and are the components of the cofactors for enzymes. Most common nutritional bone diseases is nutritional secondary hyperparathyroidism that's seen in the kittens or young adults as a consequence of feeding meat-based diet inadequately, supplemented with the calcium. Minerals include, like we already said, that the calcium, chloride, chromium, cobalt, copper, fluorine, iodine, magnesium, molybdenum. So there are others that the cats carry at trace concentration, like vitamins, work synergistically with the cooperative action between them. So these nutrients are actually essential for metabolism, regulation, and normal growth of functions. So, talking about the vitamins, they are usually found in food. Some are synthesized within the animal's body. They are classified as either fat or water soluble vitamins. So, fat soluble vitamins, they include vitamin A, D, E, and K. The water soluble group includes the vitamin C and B complex. So generally we have the fat soluble vitamins, they are stored in the body, while as the water soluble ones, they pass through more quickly. Once again, I want to mention here that the carnivorous cat utilizes animal sources of nutrients more readily than the plant sources. For example, felines can convert beta carotene from plants to vitamin A. So they need preformed vitamin A from an animal source. So this type needs no conversion. So there are certain commercial cat foods and feeding guidelines for the cats. So although cats and their wild relatives are carnivores, they entirely satisfactory cat foods can be prepared using significant proportions of the ingredients. Cats, like dogs, do not require variety in their diet. A high quality, nutritionally commercial cat food plus the fresh water will meet their demands without supplementation. There are certain potential toxins that have limited ability. For example, we have the cats that have the limited ability to detoxify certain food constituents and are thus more susceptible to these compounds called the potential toxins than some other mammals. For example, the benzoic acid and benzoate salts are used as antifungal agents in human foods, but they should not be used in cat food because of the small margin of safety for the cat. So, in case of cat food, the sorbic acid is an effective and safer alternative to be used as an antifungal agent. Although evidence is sparse, but it's also found that they may be prone to avoid use of high levels of propylene glycol in cat foods because of the sensitivity of the cat erythrocyte to oxidative degradation of hemoglobin. So these are the different potential toxins that the cats are very sensitive to. So avoiding these kinds of toxins in the cat food will keep the cats healthy. So that was all about the nutritional and feed requirement of the sheep, goat, cats, and dogs. Thank you.